Well, hello there. Today I'm going to be giving you my top 5 reasons I believe you should play Banished. So for those of you unfamiliar, Banished bills itself as a city building strategy simulation game in which you are given control of a group of exiled civilians and must direct them to ensure they succeed in their endeavors to establish a new life away from whatever past they left behind them. Now, the reasons that I list are going to be in no particular order. I do not believe one is necessarily more important than the other, although maybe to me, subjectively, I could say that some are higher on my list than others. However, the order in which I list these reasons is not intended to be indicative of the importance I give them. Reason number 1. The classical pioneer setting. I believe too many city building simulation games these days focus too much on the modern world. Games like SimCity or City Skylines or maybe even Tropico, all of which are based within at least the last 200 years. Banished takes it a bit further back. In Banished, the buildings you build are very Renaissance or even classical era buildings. They have thatched roofs. The buildings are built out of stone. You have dirt paths, you have stone paths, but you don't have highways. There is no electricity in the game. Everything is based in that very classical, maybe pioneer era that was really prominent back when people were first starting to colonize the Americas. I personally find this era of human development more interesting and unfortunately too frequently neglected. There is that time period between maybe, say, the Renaissance and the Industrial era that never really receives a whole lot of love when it comes to video games. Yes, there have been some, but all in all, people either focus, it seems, on the very ancient era, stuff up until maybe the medieval ages, or past that and into the future with games based in space. And I really like the fact that Banished serves that era, that often neglected era, up so well as a city building strategy simulation game. So with Banished, you're not going to be controlling a massive economy. Everything is on a much smaller scale. But at the same time, it doesn't feel like there's really anything missing from the game. Reason number 2, survival. Now, survival builds a little bit on reason number 1. But in Banished, you are set up in a hostile environment. There are many environmental perils that your people can fall susceptible to, and you really are out there on your own for the most part, with the exception of a traveling merchant that will arrive in your town once you have built a trading post. But for the most part, you are on your own here, and it is not a simple case of if you fail to meet your people's needs that they'll simply leave. They will actually starve to death if you neglect to give them enough food. If they are left without homes in the winter, they will freeze to death. And this really builds part of the emotional attachment you have to your people, because you're going to feel a little bit guilty if you allow them to starve to death due to your own negligence. All the people have names and they live their own little lives in their own little houses. Each house will even stock their own inventory. So when one of them happens to die because you were a very careless overseer of the production in the game, you're going to feel a little bit guilty about that. And that is a connection that a lot of bigger economy-focused city building strategy games really neglect. I remember playing SimCity 2000 back in the day. There was no feeling that you had actually done somebody hurt that you were put in charge of. Because if the people didn't like your city, they would just leave, of course. If your taxes were too high, nobody was going to build. That survival element just wasn't present in other city building games, and it still isn't for the large part, with the exception of Banished. And I know this has led some people to say, oh, Banished is not a city building simulation game. I disagree. It is very focused on city building simulation. There aren't any enemies in the game, but the entire environment can work against you if you're not prepared for it. It can dish out. Diseases, tornadoes, all of these things. It can rain, it can snow. You have all 4 seasons. Everything comes into play beautifully in Banished. Make this a city building strategy game that actually pits you against the environment at the same time, not just against your emptying coffers, not against your yearly deficit. Reason number 3, a sandbox world. Now, I understand that a lot of city building simulation strategy type games do feature a sandbox-like world. However, Banished is truly as open-ended as they come. You're not locked out of any technology or any building from the start of the game. Everything is available to you and at your disposal, and it is up to you to build your economy wisely. If you expand too far into one area, that could potentially have the effect of disrupting your economy. So if the first building you put down happens to be a trading post and you neglect to build any food generating buildings, your people could go without food for the first year, and some of them might starve during the winter. So there are consequences, of course, associated with sort of building the wrong buildings, but none of them are actually locked out from the beginning. Everything is available to the player, and even better yet, the game doesn't have any DLC, and it is still being actively developed as of October 10th, 2015. I think this demonstrates on the part of the developer a commitment to putting the player in control as much as possible of their experience with the game. There have been other popular games that have also taken this approach, such as Don't Starve. The complete lack of arbitrary objectives within the game, maybe aside from achievements, means that the player is left to decide what is important to them and prioritize their own, to create their own little mini goals, and that requires a bit more thought, of course. It is not a mindless game, but at the same time, I really dislike the type of game in which you are very scripted in what you can do, and the main method of progression is determined in the context of quests, because that seems like a very cheap reward system. It doesn't respect the player's intelligence. It makes the assumption that the player is too stupid to actually come up with anything interesting to do on their own. And I mean, if you take a look at other games, for example, and I don't mean to compare Banished to games that I'm going to mention, but Minecraft and Terraria are two very successful games that pretty much have universal acclaim. Both of them are sandbox games because they allow that rogue element. It is not just what the developer wanted you to experience, but you have to go out there and create your own experiences, and the developers are simply giving you the tools. And Banished is a great city building strategy game that works to that same strength. Reason number 4, customizable interface. Now, while Banished's interface might not look all that clean or modern, it is very customizable. Oftentimes, I will be limited as to what I can actually put up on the screen depending upon what the developers considered important at the time. Banished deviates greatly from this trope. Sure, you have a menu in the lower right hand corner of the game in which you can use to select the buildings you build, but every other element of the UI can be moved around and closed at your convenience. If you don't want to see the overview for the village health, how well your citizens are doing, how happy they are, you can close that off and just view the entire screen bare with the menu bar at the bottom. At the same time, if you want to monitor 10 different buildings maybe, all those building dialogues can be pinned up on the screen where they're just within a glance to see how well you are progressing in those areas. Now, the one downside to this is there is a limit to how many dialogues you can have on the screen. I think I counted 15 before the game crashed. But for the vast majority of players, this is more than enough and offers much greater flexibility in terms of the interface than every other city builder out there that I've seen. Finally, number 5, mods. Now, about a year ago, the developer of Banished, which is just one person, they opened up the Steam Workshop, which allowed players to create their own mods of the game, and this really changes everything about Banished. There are literally mods out there that are based on total conversion that add an entirely different time frame to the game. Some of them even add enemies. Some of them are total conversion mods. Others simply just tweak certain elements of it. Do you want your citizens to harvest more wood per tree? There's a mod for that. Sick of having to chop firewood for your houses every winter? There's a mod for that. Do you speak a different language that is unsupported by the game currently? Well, guess what? There is likely a mod for that as well. There are lots of mods already in the Steam Workshop for Banished. At the time of this recording, it's over 1,000. So if you are looking for a slight change in the game, you're likely going to find it. And even if you can't, the great thing about modability of a game is it gives the tools to you, the player, to create the experience that you really want to see in the game. So if you don't like the current setting of Banished, you could throw all of that out. Even the art assets can be modded. You can make a total conversion game, or you could just add a building. It is entirely up to the player, and it's a very smart thing on the part of the developer to implement Steam Workshop in the process, because a lot of games, they will attract a very core demographic who really love the game, but If the developer doesn't introduce content from time to time, or give them, the players, the tools to create the content they want to see, the game can stagnate quite a bit. Even for those most die-hard players who are fans of it. And eventually they'll move on to something more interesting. But if you give those players the tools to make the game what they want to, you end up with great stuff like Gary's mod. I mean, if we look at the source engine. So even if you don't like the vanilla version of Banished, I'm sure you can find a mod to give you the experience that you're looking for in a survival city building simulation game. So there you have it, my 5 reasons why I believe you should try Banished. It is currently available on Steam and DRM free. So whether you prefer the convenience of the Steam client or the reliability of being able to play your game DRM free anytime, anywhere, there is a version of the game for you. So thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you next time.